My mother actually believed she could use my existence as a dumping ground for her favorite child's mistakes. She literally planned to abandon 4 screaming toddlers on my frozen porch on Christmas Eve, fully expecting me to cancel my entire life to raise them while she hopped on a flight to Paris. She had absolutely no idea I was already sitting in a first-class cabin halfway across the world, holding a glass of champagne and a legal document that would completely destroy her reality. I am Clara, 34 years old, and for my entire adult life, I was the designated family failure simply because I never married. I work as a data analytics director for a global tech company, a job that requires brutal hours and sharp logic. Yet, to my mother, Barbara, my 6-figure salary was nothing more than a convenient emergency fund for the real family members. The true nightmare started exactly 2 hours before my flight was scheduled to take off. I was settling into my private suite on an Emirates flight to the Maldives, adjusting my seat and enjoying the quiet hum of the cabin when my phone aggressively buzzed with an incoming call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing it would be some last-minute demand for the holidays. Less than a minute later, a voice message popped up. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. "You are single. You have no real life. What could you possibly be busy with? Cancel whatever pathetic plans you have. We are dropping Amanda's 4 kids at your house in an hour. We are flying to Paris." Her voice was shrill, echoing with that familiar tone of absolute entitlement. No greeting, no asking if I was available, just a direct order expecting total obedience. I stared at the screen, a cold realization washing over me. For years, I would have scrambled. I would have canceled my dinner reservations, driven home in the snow, and opened my door to fix their mess. Not today. I calmly typed out a single text message. "I am not home. Do not bring them here." Then I turned my phone on airplane mode. To understand the sheer audacity of her demand, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy of my family. I have a younger sister, named Amanda. She is 31 years old and has been the golden child since the day she was born. Amanda is beautiful, highly manipulative, and has perfected the art of playing the helpless victim. She married Terrence, an African-American man who works as a commercial real estate director. On the outside, they are the picture-perfect wealthy couple. Terrence drives a luxury imported SUV, wears custom-tailored Italian suits, and brags loudly about his massive commercial investments at every family gathering. But behind closed doors, their lavish lifestyle is a crumbling house of cards, built entirely on my hard work. While my parents celebrate Amanda and Terrence for giving them 4 beautiful grandchildren, they conveniently ignore who actually pays for those children to eat. Whenever Terrence claimed he was waiting on a huge commission check to clear, my mother would call me, demanding I cover their mortgage payment so the kids would not end up on the street. Just last year, my father Richard fell ill and needed an expensive medical procedure. I emptied $20,000 from my savings to pay his hospital bills directly. 2 months later, I discovered my mother had taken a massive refund from the hospital after his insurance finally kicked in, and instead of paying me back, she used the money to pay off Terrence's overdue luxury car lease. When I confronted her about it, she did not even flinch. She just looked at me with disgust and said I was being selfish for caring about money when my brother-in-law needed to look successful for his clients. Every milestone I achieved was minimized or completely ignored. When I was promoted to director of my department, my mother did not congratulate me. She simply asked when I was going to find a husband to make up for my lack of feminine qualities. My career, my independence, my financial stability were all viewed as a threat to their traditional narrative, yet simultaneously exploited to keep their favorite daughter comfortable. I took a slow sip of my champagne, savoring the crisp taste as the flight attendant offered me a warm towel. The contrast between my current reality and the chaos unfolding back in Seattle was deliciously sharp. I had spent 10 years playing the reliable scapegoat, 10 years of funding their fake wealth while swallowing their daily insults. But this Christmas, I finally chose myself. I booked a $25,000 luxury vacation for one, deciding that my peace of mind was worth every single penny. If you have ever been treated as the family ATM just because you are single and successful, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You will not believe how much worse this gets, and you definitely want to hear how I turned the tables on their parasitic behavior. As the massive airplane engines roared to life, pushing us down the runway, I allowed myself a genuine smile. I knew exactly what was happening back home. I knew my mother was currently screaming at her phone, furious that her designated servant had dared to say no. I knew Amanda was probably crying fake tears, complaining that her spinster sister was trying to ruin her romantic getaway to Paris. I knew Terrence was likely pacing around his leased SUV, wondering how they were going to dump the children without missing their international flight. For the first time in my life, their manufactured crisis was not my problem. I had drawn a line in the sand, a cold, hard boundary that no amount of guilt-tripping could cross. They had pushed me to my absolute limit, expecting me to sacrifice my entire holiday season to play unpaid nanny while they lived out a fantasy they could not actually afford. The plane lifted off the ground, ascending through the thick winter clouds above the Pacific Northwest. With every 1,000 feet of altitude we gained, the heavy burden of my toxic family grew lighter. I settled back into my plush leather seat and opened the window shade, watching the city lights of Seattle fade into the darkness. I was headed to a tropical paradise, completely untethered from their endless demands. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. My mother was not the type of woman to accept a refusal gracefully. She was a narcissist who thrived on control, and my defiance would undoubtedly provoke a massive retaliation. I just had no idea how far she was willing to go, or what horrifying secrets she and Terrence were hiding behind their upcoming trip to France. The seatbelt chime softly echoed through the first-class cabin, signaling we had reached cruising altitude. I adjusted the position of my lie-flat seat and pulled out my tablet. With a few taps, I purchased the premium satellite internet package for the flight. I knew exactly what was waiting for me in the digital realm, but I wanted to watch them scramble. As soon as the Wi-Fi connected, my phone screen lit up like a slot machine paying out a jackpot. 42 unread text messages, 19 missed calls, 7 frantic voicemails. All of them accumulated in the brief window since I had put my phone on airplane mode. I opened the family group chat. The messages from my younger sister Amanda and her husband Terrence painted a perfect picture of their escalating panic and sheer entitlement. Amanda started with her usual manipulative guilt trips. "Please tell me you are joking. You know how important this trip is for us. You are ruining my life right now." When the guilt tripping did not yield an immediate response, the mask slipped. Her true colors bled onto the screen in rapid-fire text bubbles. "You are doing this on purpose because you are miserable. You are just a jealous, bitter spinster who wants to ruin my happiness because you cannot find a man. You are completely pathetic." I let out a soft, humorless laugh, taking a sip of the vintage champagne the flight attendant had just poured for me. Jealous. That was always their favorite word. Any time I established a boundary, any time I refused to be their doormat, I was simply labeled jealous of Amanda's supposedly perfect marriage. Terrence chimed into the group chat right after her, his messages reeking of the toxic bravado he always displayed at family events. "Listen here, Clara. I just closed a massive commercial real estate deal. I secured millions in funding today. I am taking my wife to Paris to celebrate my success. Stop playing games and open your front door right now. We are dropping the kids off and heading to the airport. You have absolutely nothing better to do anyway." The sheer audacity of his words made my blood run cold. If he had truly just closed a massive multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal, he could have easily hired an elite overnight nanny service. He could have paid professionals to watch his 4 children. Instead, they were relying on the sister they openly despised, demanding free labor under the guise of family obligation. I did not write a long paragraph defending myself. I did not explain my hard work or demand an apology. Emotional reactions were exactly what they wanted. They fed on my frustration, so I gave them nothing but ice. I typed a single, factual statement into the chat. I am out of the country. I hit send and watched the read receipts pop up almost instantly. They were staring at their screens, waiting for me to cave. Their responses flooded in less than 10 seconds later. "Stop lying," Amanda wrote. "We know you were in your house hiding. You never travel anywhere." Terrence followed up immediately. "This is not funny anymore, Clara. Open the damn door. Mom is already packing the kids into her car and driving to your house. You better be ready when she gets there." They honestly believed I was cowering inside my home in Seattle, pretending to be away just to spite them. The absolute delusion of their reality was staggering. As I read Terrence's text bragging about his massive wealth, a deeply bitter memory surfaced, reminding me exactly why I felt zero guilt for abandoning them to their own manufactured crisis. It happened last November. My father, Richard, who was 62 years old, had suffered a severe health scare, requiring emergency surgery. My mother, Barbara, had called me in hysterics, sobbing uncontrollably into the phone. She claimed that his medical insurance had completely denied the claim due to a technicality, and the hospital was demanding immediate payment or they would send the massive bill to collections and seize their assets. I panicked. I loved my father, even if he was a passive enabler to my mother's abuse. Without hesitating, I liquidated a portion of my investment portfolio and wired $20,000 directly to my mother's bank account to save them from financial ruin. 2 weeks later, the truth shattered my heart. I was scrolling through social media and saw a video Terrence posted. He was standing in the driveway of his suburban home, wearing a designer watch and holding the keys to a brand new, fully loaded, imported luxury SUV. He captioned the video about the rewards of the daily grind. A few days later, during a rare phone call with my father, Richard, casually mentioned the stress of his ongoing medical debt. He told me he had to take on extra consulting work because his hospital bills had gone to collections. My stomach had dropped into an endless abyss. The $20,000 I sacrificed for his health never went to the hospital. Barbara had rerouted every single cent of my money to pay off the massive arrears on Terrence's luxury car lease to prevent it from being repossessed. When I confronted my mother about the stolen funds, she did not shed a single tear. She coldly stared me down and stated that Terrence was an African-American man in a highly competitive commercial real estate market and he needed to project extreme wealth to secure investors. She told me I was being entirely too petty over money I could easily earn back with my corporate job, while Terrence's entire image was at stake. She literally prioritized her son-in-law's fake status symbol over her own husband's health and her daughter's financial security. That was the exact moment my empathy for my family completely died. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a limitless resource to be extracted, a machine that generated money to fund the golden child's fantasy life. Sitting in the luxurious airplane cabin, soaring high above the clouds, I felt absolutely nothing for their current panic. I pulled up the flight tracker on my monitor, watching the tiny digital airplane inch its way toward the Middle East. My phone buzzed again, breaking my concentration. It was a direct message from Barbara. "I am pulling into your driveway right now. Open the door or I am leaving them on the freezing porch." My heart rate remained perfectly steady. I knew my mother was serious. She was ruthless enough to use her own grandchildren as pawns in a game of chicken. But what she failed to understand was that I was dead serious too. I locked my phone screen, took another sip of champagne, and prepared for the next layer of the storm. The flight from Seattle to Dubai took 15 hours, a stretch of time I used to completely compartmentalize the impending disaster back home. When the massive Airbus finally touched down at Dubai International Airport, I stepped off the plane feeling completely rested and utterly detached from the emotional manipulation my family thrived on. I settled into a quiet lounge chair and reconnected my phone. Before the server could even set my coffee down, my screen illuminated with an aggressive flash of red light. It was an urgent motion alert from the Ring camera mounted on the front porch of my Seattle home. The timestamp read exactly 11:45 at night. Christmas Eve was in full swing back in Washington state, and a brutal winter storm had currently blanketed the entire Pacific Northwest in several inches of freezing snow. I tapped the notification, pulling up the live video feed. The high-definition camera instantly transmitted the chaotic scene unfolding on my property. Through the swirling white blizzard, a heavy-set black SUV aggressively hopped the curb, its tires spinning wildly, before slamming into park right in front of my walkway. It was my mother. Barbara threw the driver's side door open and stomped out into the freezing weather. She marched around to the back doors of the SUV and yanked them open, shouting orders that the camera microphone picked up with chilling clarity. "Get out right now! Move it! We do not have time for this! Crying! I am already freezing!" She reached into the back seat and roughly hauled out Leo and Mia. The 7-year-old twins looked absolutely terrified. They were wearing light winter jackets, clearly not dressed appropriately for a midnight blizzard. Leo was clutching his sister's hand, his small shoulders shaking violently. Next came 5-year-old Noah, who was actively sobbing, rubbing his eyes with his mitten-covered hands. Finally, Barbara reached in and pulled out little Lily. The 3-year-old was barely awake, shivering uncontrollably as the freezing wind whipped her thin pink coat around her legs. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Watching 4 innocent children stand shivering in the dark was entirely different from ignoring a manipulative text message. But the sheer horror of the situation escalated when Barbara marched over to the trunk of the SUV. The hydraulic liftgate opened to reveal an absolute mountain of luggage. She grabbed the handles of 2 massive hard-shell suitcases and dragged them through the snow, hauling them up the wooden steps onto my porch. She went back to the vehicle, grabbed 2 more enormous bags and dragged them up. Then she went back a 3rd time, retrieving a final pair of oversized trunks. 6 massive suitcases in total. I zoomed in on the video feed, my analytical brain immediately kicking into overdrive. If Amanda and Terrence were simply going on a 2-week romantic getaway to Paris, why pack 6 giant heavy-duty suitcases? This volume of luggage looked like an entire household being packed up and relocated. It looked completely permanent. Before I could fully process the implication of the luggage, Barbara stomped right up to my front door. She reached deep into the pocket of her mink coat and pulled out a shiny brass key. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. I had never given my mother a key to my house. I had explicitly forbidden it after she once used a spare key at my old apartment to let herself in and rearrange my furniture because she thought it lacked style. I realized in a flash of cold clarity that she must have stolen my spare from my purse during the hospital incident with my father last November, secretly copying it to maintain access to my property whenever she deemed necessary. The utter violation of my privacy made my blood boil. Barbara shoved the key into the deadbolt, turned it aggressively, and forced my front door open. The house inside was pitch black. I had turned off the main heating system to save energy while I was traveling, meaning the interior temperature was barely hovering above 50 degrees. "Get inside! All of you! Get in the house right now!" Barbara screamed over the howling wind. Noah wailed loudly, grabbing onto his grandmother's coat. "It is dark in there! I am scared! I want my mommy!" Barbara physically pried the 5-year-old's hands off her expensive jacket. Your mother is going to Paris. Stop acting like a baby and get inside. Clara will be here soon. She is just playing games." With a ruthless shove, my mother pushed all four terrified, crying children into the dark, freezing hallway of my empty house. She did not turn on a single light. She did not check the thermostat. She did not even step inside to make sure they were safe. She simply hurled the 6 massive suitcases through the doorway, letting them crash onto my hardwood floors. The live feed captured the exact moment Barbara pulled the heavy wooden door shut. The loud, definitive click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through my phone speaker. She had locked them inside. She turned her back on her own grandchildren, practically sprinting down the snowy walkway to escape the freezing temperature. She climbed back into the driver's seat of the SUV, slammed the door, and reversed wildly out of my driveway, completely vanishing into the winter storm. I sat frozen in the luxurious Dubai airport lounge, the rich aroma of my espresso suddenly turning my stomach. The video feed on my screen showed nothing but the dark, empty porch, the snow rapidly covering the tire tracks Barbara had left behind. She did it. She had committed a severe felony, abandoning 4 young, defenseless minors in an empty, unheated house in the middle of the night, purely to serve the golden child's selfish desires. My mother was so completely blinded by her narcissistic need to accommodate Terrence and Amanda that she had transformed from a toxic parent into an actual criminal. I stared at the frozen screen for exactly 2 seconds before my professional training as a data director completely overrode my initial shock. I closed the security camera application and immediately dialed my mother's cell phone. It rang 3 times, each ring echoing with the heavy realization of her absolute betrayal. When she finally answered, the unmistakable background noise of a bustling airport terminal and the muffled, echoing announcements of a public address system filtered through the line. They were already at the airport. "I told you I was leaving them," Barbara said, her voice dripping with thick, arrogant satisfaction. She was actually laughing, enjoying the sound of her own manufactured victory over me. "Figure it out, spinster. Our flight board's in 20 minutes. "Mom, you cannot leave children," I started, but my words were abruptly cut off. Before I could even finish the sentence, she ended the call. I tapped the screen to dial her back immediately, only to hear the automated voice recording stating the number was unreachable. She had blocked me. My own mother had dumped 4 terrified children in a dark, freezing house on Christmas Eve and blocked my number so she could drink champagne in an airport lounge without interruption. I sat in a luxurious Dubai airport suite, surrounded by the scent of expensive coffee and the quiet hum of international travelers. The physical distance was staggering. I was literally 8,000 miles away from my front door. Inside my unheated house in Seattle, Leo, Mia, Noah, and little Lily were locked in the pitch-black, cold, and crying for a mother who was actively fleeing the country to celebrate a fabricated real estate deal. I faced a massive moral and legal crisis. A traditional enabling family member would have panicked. They would have frantically called a neighbor to break a window or booked a $60,000 private charter to rush back across the globe and fix the mess. That was exactly what Barbara and Amanda expected me to do. They were betting their entire Paris vacation on my deeply ingrained sense of guilt and my natural protective instinct toward my nieces and nephews. They assumed I would simply accept the burden, just as I had accepted the burden of my father's medical bills that they stole to pay for Terrence's luxury SUV. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not hyperventilate or scream. Instead, the final remaining thread of loyalty I held for my blood relatives snapped. I shifted into pure, cold-blooded logic. I evaluated the situation not as a family dispute, but as a set of severe, actionable data points. Data point 1, my mother had committed a severe felony by breaking and entering into my private property with a stolen key. Data point 2, she had committed child endangerment by abandoning 4 minors in a hazardous, unheated environment during a brutal winter storm. Data point 3, the perpetrators were all conveniently gathered at a single location with nowhere to hide, waiting to cross international borders. To fix this by calling a friend to rescue the kids would only make me legally liable and validate my family's twisted manipulation. If I arranged for private care, I would be shielding them from the consequences of their own actions. I had spent 10 years shielding them. It was time to let the justice system handle their entitlement. I opened my laptop and established a secure internet connection to make an international outgoing call to the United States. I bypassed the standard emergency routing and directly dialed the Seattle Police Department dispatch, immediately requesting to connect a 3-way line with Washington State Child Protective Services. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Seattle Police Department, 911, what is your emergency? I took a measured breath, ensuring my tone was absolutely devoid of panic or hysteria. I needed them to take swift, immediate action. My name is Clara. I need to report an illegal breaking and entering and the severe abandonment of 4 minor children at my private residence. I am currently out of the country. I could hear the dispatcher begin typing rapidly on their keyboard, the clacking sound sharp and urgent. Are the children in immediate danger, ma'am? The house has no primary heating activated, and it is currently snowing heavily, I explained with icy precision. The children range in age from 3 to 7 years old. They were just locked inside by my mother, who unlawfully entered my property without my consent. She left them in the dark. I rattled off my home address, making sure every detail was impeccably clear. I have live video evidence of the crime captured on my security cameras, which I can transmit to your department immediately. While speaking to the dispatcher, my hands moved quickly across my laptop keyboard. I downloaded the high-definition video files directly from my security system cloud storage. I compiled the clips of Barbara violently shoving the crying children into the dark hallway and locking the deadbolt behind her. I attached these files to an email addressed to the police department evidence portal. I wanted the arresting officers to see the exact level of cruelty my mother possessed before they approached her at the gate. The Child Protective Services agent, who had been silently listening on the line, immediately chimed in. Her voice was sharp, with deep concern. Ma'am, do you know where the individuals who abandoned the children went? Do you have a current location for the suspects? I smiled, a tight, humorless expression that held no warmth whatsoever. Yes, I stated clearly. The perpetrators are currently drinking in a VIP lounge at SeaTac International Airport. Their names are Barbara Amanda and Terrence. They are scheduled to board a flight to Paris in approximately 20 minutes. You need to stop them before they leave United States airspace. We are dispatching units to your residence immediately to secure the children, the police dispatcher confirmed. The urgency in his voice escalating. We are also contacting Port of Seattle Police and TSA at SeaTac right now. Do you have a flight number or airline? I provided every single detail I had gathered from Amanda's previous boastful text messages in our family group chat. I gave them descriptions of Terrence's custom suit and Barbara's mink coat. I handed the authorities a perfectly wrapped package of evidence to execute an immediate arrest. As I ended the call, I looked out the massive glass windows of the Dubai terminal. My family thought they had trapped me, but they were about to learn a devastating lesson about what happens when you push a data director too far. There was absolutely no turning back now. While my family lived out their final moments of delusion, I was stepping off a seaplane and walking onto the sun-drenched wooden deck of my overwater villa in the Maldives. The crystal-clear turquoise Indian Ocean stretched out endlessly in every direction. A private butler handed me a chilled tropical drink. I took a deep breath of the warm, salty air, feeling a profound sense of peace. The vibrant tropical paradise was the perfect contrast to the bitter, freezing blizzard I had left behind in Seattle. Back at SeaTac International Airport, Terrence, Amanda, and Barbara were lounging in the exclusive first-class departure gate. Terrence was adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit, loudly bragging to a fellow passenger about his massive real estate empire and their upcoming romantic getaway. Amanda and Barbara were comfortably sipping mimosas, laughing and completely unbothered by the terrifying reality that 4 young children were currently locked in a freezing, dark house. The gate agent suddenly paused the boarding process. 2 Port of Seattle police officers, accompanied by 3 armed TSA agents and a plainclothes detective, marched purposefully through the crowded terminal. They bypassed the standard security checkpoints and zeroed in directly on the VIP seating area. Terrence stood up with a look of mild annoyance, flashing his trademark arrogant smile. He clearly assumed there had been some sort of ticketing error. He attempted to use his smooth corporate charm, straightening his expensive tie and speaking in a calm, authoritative voice to the approaching officers. The lead officer did not even blink. Before Terrence could finish his sentence, the officer forcefully grabbed his arm, spun him around, and snapped heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The loud click of the metal cuffs sent a shockwave through the luxury lounge. Amanda dropped her mimosa, the glass shattering loudly across the polished floor. She lunged forward, screaming hysterically at the officers aggressively demanding they unhand her highly successful husband. A female officer immediately intercepted Amanda, swiftly pinning her arms behind her back. "You are under arrest for felony child abandonment and the severe endangerment of minors," the officer announced, her stern voice carrying across the entire terminal. Barbara went completely pale, frantically clutching her designer handbag. She tried to back away, sputtering desperate lies about a simple family misunderstanding, but a third officer tightly grabbed her shoulder to secure her. The flawless, wealthy image my family had meticulously curated for years disintegrated in an instant. Hundreds of waiting passengers pulled out their phones, recording the chaotic spectacle. Amanda was thrashing and sobbing, her expensive makeup running down her face as she screamed my name in absolute fury. Terrence was completely silenced, his fake bravado entirely crushed under the immediate weight of law enforcement. The police marched the 3 of them out of the terminal in a deeply humiliating procession, dragging them right past the boarding gate to Paris and straight toward the waiting squad cars. 12 hours later, the glaring contrast between my serene reality and their absolute downfall reached its absolute peak. I was reclining on a pristine white sand beach outside my private villa, listening to the gentle lapping of the Indian Ocean waves. The tropical sun warmed my skin as a resort attendant discreetly placed a fresh plate of exotic fruits on my cabana table. My phone, resting on the wooden deck, vibrated sharply. The caller ID displayed an incoming collect call from the King County Correctional Facility in Seattle. I accepted the charges with a calm, deliberate swipe of my finger. "You monster!" Barbara's voice exploded through the speaker, her shrill tone cracking with pure, unhinged narcissism. "You actually called the cops on your own family? Drop the charges right now. Call them back and tell them it was a massive misunderstanding. You need to book a flight home immediately and go pick up those kids." I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled passion fruit cocktail, letting the sweet and tart flavors mix perfectly before I bothered to respond. "There is absolutely no misunderstanding," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You deliberately broke into my house and abandoned 4 terrified toddlers in the freezing snow. You locked them inside a dark, unheated property. The police reviewed the high-definition security footage. They saw everything." "You are twisting the narrative to make us look bad," Barbara shrieked desperately, attempting to gaslight me from inside a holding cell. "We were just dropping them off for a fun holiday sleepover. You are acting completely insane over a simple change of plans. Terrence is going to lose his commercial real estate investors over this public humiliation. You are destroying his career. Get back here and fix this mess immediately." The sheer delusion required to demand my servitude while standing in a jail cell was genuinely breathtaking. She still viewed me as nothing more than a convenient tool to absorb her consequences. I could hear Amanda wailing uncontrollably somewhere in the background, completely unable to handle the harsh reality of a concrete environment instead of a Parisian hotel. "I'm not fixing anything," I replied smoothly. "You made a calculated decision to abandon helpless minors to fund your fantasy vacation. Now you get to face the legal reality. Child abandonment carries a severe felony sentence in Washington state, Mom. You are looking at serious prison time. The state has already taken protective custody of the children, and there is absolutely nothing I can do to reverse a federal criminal indictment." "But we are your family," she wailed, her false bravado finally cracking into raw panic. "You owe us." "Not anymore," I said coldly. "Enjoy your concrete cell. I have a 90-minute deep tissue massage booked." I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the red button to end the call, and permanently blocked the facility number from reaching my device ever again. The boundary was finally set. I immediately stood up from my lounge chair and dragged my laptop out of the bright Maldivian sunlight and into the cool, air-conditioned shade of the villa interior. I pushed the luxury fruit platter aside and transformed the glass dining table into a secure, virtual command center. I pulled my secondary work tablet from my carry-on, synced it to my primary laptop, and established a heavily encrypted virtual private network back to my servers in Seattle. The tranquil sounds of the ocean outside were entirely replaced by the rapid, rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. I needed an apex predator to hunt down the truth, and I knew exactly who to call. I scrolled through my encrypted contacts and initiated a secure voice call to Mitchell. Mitchell was not a warm, friendly family lawyer who dealt in mediations and compromises. He was a ruthless, cutthroat corporate attorney who specialized in high-stakes litigation, hostile takeovers, and burying financial adversaries under mountains of indisputable evidence. I kept him on retainer for my personal wealth management, knowing his complete lack of empathy made him the perfect legal weapon. The line rang exactly once before he answered. His voice was sharp, professional, and completely devoid of pleasantries. "Clara, it is 3 a.m. in Seattle. This better be a corporate emergency." "It is a personal emergency, Mitchell," I stated, matching his cold, businesslike tone. "But I need your corporate resources immediately. I am wiring a $50,000 emergency retainer to your firm account as we speak. I need your forensic accounting team mobilized right now." I heard the sound of a heavy chair shifting on his end of the line. The mention of the substantial retainer had instantly secured his undivided attention. "I am listening. Tell me the target." "I need a comprehensive scorched earth background check on my brother-in-law Terrence and my sister Amanda." I explained rapidly. "My mother just broke into my house and abandoned their 4 children inside before the 3 of them attempted to board an international flight to France. They were arrested at the gate by Port Authority police an hour ago." A sharp exhale of breath came through the speaker. "Child abandonment and breaking and entering. Those are severe felony charges, Clara. Do you want me to coordinate with the prosecutor's office to ensure maximum sentencing?" "Eventually, yes," I replied, my eyes scanning the frozen image of the 6 massive suitcases on my monitor. "But right now, we have a much larger problem. Terrence claims he just closed a massive commercial real estate deal and they were flying to Paris to celebrate. But they packed 6 oversized relocation trunks for the children and dumped them permanently at my property. The math does not work, Mitchell." People who just came into millions of dollars do not abandon their kids in a freezing house and flee the country. They are hiding something massive. I think Paris was not a vacation. I think it was an escape to a non-extradition zone. Mitchell's tone shifted, the predatory instincts of a seasoned litigator fully activated. "You suspect severe financial fraud." "I suspect his entire commercial real estate empire is a complete fabrication," I stated coldly. I need your team to tear apart his financial history. Pull his corporate filings, cross-reference his limited liability companies, hunt down his investor lists, and check for any sealed federal indictments. Dig into my mother's accounts as well. She has been funding their lifestyle, and I need to know exactly how deep her complicity goes. Consider it done, Mitchell replied, the sound of his fingers already flying across his own keyboard, echoing through the connection. My forensic team will have a preliminary dossier compiled within the next few hours. If he is running from something that significant, he left a paper trail. I will find it. Do not stop at his business accounts, I instructed, my voice hardening into absolute steel. Check everything tied to my family. They have been incredibly desperate for cash lately, demanding I pay their bills while simultaneously flashing luxury cars on social media. They are operating a massive financial illusion, and I need the exact blueprints of their deception. I want to know exactly what kind of fire they set before they tried to leave me holding the bag. I will call you the second I have the data, Mitchell promised. Enjoy your vacation, Clara. I will handle the demolition. I ended the call and placed my phone down on the glass table. The tropical breeze continued to rustle the sheer white curtains of my villa, but I barely felt it. I stared intensely at the multiple screens of my makeshift command center. I had spent a decade allowing my family to manipulate me with their fabricated crises, always swooping in to save them because I thought it was my fundamental duty as a daughter and a sister. I had ignored the glaring red flags, the impossible math of their lavish lifestyle, the sheer toxicity of their entitlement. But sitting in that villa, armed with lethal legal representation and an unbreakable boundary, the blindfold was finally completely off. They had tried to trap me in a prison of forced motherhood and financial ruin, while they escaped to Europe. They thought I was just a bitter, naive spinster who would dutifully accept whatever punishment they assigned to me. They were about to find out that leaving me alone to analyze the data was the most catastrophic mistake they could have ever made. The hours that followed dragged by with agonizing slowness. I remained glued to my command center in the overwater villa, ignoring the spectacular Maldivian sunset painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. The gentle splashing of the ocean against the wooden stilts beneath my feet felt entirely disconnected from the digital war room I had created across the glass dining table. I drank copious amounts of black coffee, my eyes tracking the encrypted messaging portal I used to communicate with my legal team. Mitchell was a man of his word. He did not sleep, and he certainly did not let his forensic accountant sleep when a massive retainer was on the line. At exactly 2 a.m. local time, the secure line buzzed with an incoming voice call. I hit the accept button instantly, pulling my headset microphone closer to my mouth. "Tell me you found the fire," I said, skipping any pretense of a greeting. Mitchell let out a low, humorless chuckle that sent a shiver straight down my spine. It was the sound he only made when he had completely cornered an adversary. "Clara," he began, his voice buzzing with adrenaline. "I did not just find a fire. I found a blazing inferno. Your brother-in-law is not a commercial real estate director. He is an absolute fraud." I sat up perfectly straight, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Define fraud, Mitchell. Are we talking about inflated assets or unpaid taxes?" "I am talking about a massive, multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme," he stated, dropping the bombshell with brutal precision. My forensic team bypassed his public corporate filings and dug straight into the holding companies he registered in Delaware and Nevada. Terrence does not own any commercial real estate. He never did. Every single property he claimed to manage, every building he supposedly acquired, is a complete ghost. He set up a complex web of shell companies with sophisticated websites and fake property deeds to lure in high-net-worth private investors. My mind reeled as the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. The luxury SUV, the custom Italian suits, the lavish dinners where he loudly bragged about his commission checks. It was all the theatrical performance funded by stolen money. He was using new investor capital to pay fake returns to the early investors, I reasoned aloud. The sheer audacity of the crime making my chest tight. Exactly, Mitchell confirmed. He maintained the illusion of massive success to attract even more money. But a Ponzi scheme requires constant exponential growth to survive. The second the influx of new investors slows down, the entire house of cards completely collapses. And according to my team, his cash flow dried up entirely about 4 months ago. That is why they were suddenly so desperate for money. That is why your mother had to steal the medical funds you sent for your father to save Terrence's luxury car from repossession. They were bleeding cash just to keep up appearances. How much did he steal? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Based on the preliminary audit of the shell company accounts we could access, Terrence defrauded his investors out of at least $8 million. Mitchell replied smoothly. He funneled a massive portion of that directly into personal accounts shared with Amanda. They used stolen funds to pay for their suburban mansion, their designer wardrobes, and a lifestyle they were never actually earning. Your sister is entirely complicit. She is listed as the chief financial officer on 3 of the fraudulent holding companies. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. Amanda had looked down on me for years, treating my hard-earned corporate salary as inferior to her husband's supposed real estate empire. She had called me a jealous spinster while actively spending millions of dollars stolen from innocent people. The golden child was not just entitled, she was a prolific criminal. But the unraveling did not stop there. Mitchell's tone grew even sharper, signaling the most critical piece of intelligence his team had uncovered. Clara, the financial collapse is not even the biggest problem they are facing right now, he continued. You do not steal $8 million across state lines without attracting apex predators. My contacts at the federal courthouse flagged a highly sensitive movement in the docket. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have been quietly building a case against Terrence for the past 18 months. I stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. The FBI? They have a sealed federal indictment sitting on a judge's desk right now, Mitchell confirmed, his words hitting like physical blows. Wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. They were preparing to unseal the indictment and execute a coordinated raid on his property by the end of the week. Terrence must have been tipped off by a contact, or noticed his accounts being monitored. He knew the federal agents were coming for him. The realization hit me with absolute crystal clarity. This was never about a romantic holiday in Paris to celebrate a real estate deal. France was just a layover. They were fleeing the jurisdiction of the United States government. They were attempting a desperate, permanent escape to a country without an extradition treaty, carrying whatever remaining stolen cash they could legally smuggle onto a commercial flight. They abandoned the children, I said the horrific truth, finally solidifying in my mind. They knew they were going to be international fugitives. They knew they could not run from the FBI with 4 young kids slowing them down and drawing attention. So they packed 6 trunks of the children's belongings, broke into my house, and left them for me to raise. They were literally dumping their family to save themselves from federal prison. Mitchell sighed heavily. That is exactly what happened, Clara. Your mother knew. She facilitated the entire escape plan. By dropping the kids at your house and fleeing to the airport, she was acting as a direct accessory to their flight from justice. The fact that you called the Seattle police and had them intercepted at the departure gate did not just foil a vacation. You literally stopped a federal escape plan in its tracks. You handed the FBI their primary targets on a silver platter. I looked out at the dark ocean, the waves crashing rhythmically against the stilts of my villa. The depth of their betrayal was no longer just a toxic family dynamic. It was a calculated, criminal conspiracy. They were entirely willing to saddle me with the permanent physical and financial burden of raising four traumatized children while they lived off stolen millions in exile. They viewed my life as so utterly worthless that they felt perfectly justified in destroying it to facilitate their own survival. Send me the complete forensic dossier, I commanded my voice, devoid of any remaining familial warmth. I need every single bank statement, every fraudulent property deed, and every shred of evidence linking Amanda and my mother to this scheme. I want it all compiled and ready. You will have the encrypted file in 10 minutes, Mitchell promised. But Clara, we need to brace for the fallout. When the federal agents realize your family tried to flee, they are going to freeze every single asset connected to their names. I disconnected the call, the silence of the Maldivian night returning to the villa. I had survived their emotional abuse for decades, but this was an entirely different battlefield. They had weaponized my existence, assuming I would just quietly accept my fate as the collateral damage of their criminal enterprise. They thought they could discard their children like unwanted luggage and disappear into the night. I opened my email client, waiting for the forensic files to arrive. The family I knew was officially dead, and I was about to bury the remains. The gentle chime of my email client broke the absolute silence of my Maldivian overwater villa. A new message had appeared in my encrypted inbox from Mitchell. The subject line was completely blank, but the attachment was a massive, heavily encrypted zip file. I sat forward in my chair, the tropical humidity suddenly feeling entirely irrelevant against the ice-cold focus taking over my mind. I typed in the complex 256-bit decryption key Mitchell and I exclusively used for sensitive data transfers. The progress bar rapidly filled the screen, unpacking hundreds of megabytes of raw financial data, scanned documents, and legal filings. The folder structure Mitchell's forensic team had assembled was ruthlessly organized. There were directories labeled with Terrance's various shell companies offshore, wire transfers, and internal communications. But my eyes immediately locked onto a subfolder ominously titled Liabilities and Guarantors. Before opening it, I briefly clicked through the folder detailing Amanda's direct involvement. I needed to see exactly how deep my golden child sister had buried herself in this criminal enterprise. For years, Amanda had played the helpless, delicate wife who was simply lucky enough to marry a wealthy real estate mogul. She claimed she knew nothing about business, preferring to focus on her designer wardrobe and managing her perfect suburban image. The forensic data completely shattered that curated facade. The documents showed Amanda's digital signature on dozens of wire transfers, moving stolen investor capital into private offshore accounts. I stared at highlighted bank statements showing Amanda directly paying for her luxury handbags, expensive spa retreats, and first-class flight tickets straight from an escrow account meant for commercial property development. She was not a naive wife blindly enjoying her husband's success. She was a fully aware, active participant in a massive federal fraud, enthusiastically spending stolen money while turning her nose up at my legitimate corporate salary. Disgust washed over me, but I pushed it aside. I needed facts, not emotions. I navigated back to the main directory and double-clicked the folder labeled Liabilities and Guarantors. Inside was a single high-resolution PDF file. It was a commercial bridging loan agreement from a mid-tier private equity lender headquartered in Chicago, dated exactly 2 years ago. I opened the document, my eyes quickly scanning the dense legal jargon. The principal loan amount was staggering, $600,000. The stated purpose of the loan was to provide immediate liquidity and operational capital for Horizon View Developments, which I now knew was just another one of Terrance's fake shell companies. I scrolled down to the borrower information. Terrance's name and forged corporate credentials filled the primary fields. But a commercial lender does not hand over more than $500,000 to a volatile LLC without a rock-solid personal guarantee. I scrolled to the final page of the contract, looking for the secondary guarantor. The air in my lungs vanished. There, printed in stark black ink on a legally binding federal financial document, was my full legal name, Clara Marie Davis. Below my name was my exact date of birth, my current home address in Seattle, and my highly guarded Social Security number. Attached to the application was a comprehensive credit report showing my pristine 820-plus credit score. On the final signature line, a digital signature that closely mimicked the slope of my own handwriting had been applied via an electronic signing platform. The room spun. My vision tunneled directly onto those 9 digits of my Social Security number. I had never seen this document in my life. I had never spoken to this private equity lender. I had never agreed to co-sign a loan for Terrence. I aggressively guarded my financial data, utilizing strict 2-factor authentication and credit monitoring alerts. My impeccable credit history was the product of a decade of relentless hard work, disciplined saving, and calculated financial planning. And someone in my family had stolen it to Ponzi scheme. My analytical brain immediately began tracing the timeline, hunting for the exact moment the security breach occurred. 2 years ago. The date on the fraudulent loan contract matched perfectly with one specific isolated incident. 2 years ago, I was undergoing a rigorous top-level background check and security clearance protocol for my promotion to Data Analytics Director. Human Resources needed my original birth certificate and a secondary form of government identification expedited to their office. At the time, I was traveling in London for an industry conference. My crucial documents were locked inside the family safe at my parents' house, a remnant of my college days that I had simply never bothered to retrieve. I had called my mother in a panic, begging her to open the safe, retrieve my documents, and overnight them to my corporate office via a secure courier. Barbara had enthusiastically agreed. She had played the role of the supportive mother flawlessly. But I remembered being frustrated because she took 3 full days to finally mail the package, blaming traffic and long lines at the post office. She did not wait because of traffic. She waited because she was actively copying my vital records. Barbara had stolen my Social Security number, my birth certificate, and my identity. She had handed my entire financial existence over to Terrence so he could secure a $600,000 lifeline to keep his fraudulent empire from imploding. My perfect credit score was the only structural pillar holding their entire house of cards together. They had literally used my name to steal from a private equity firm. The sheer, breathtaking magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical strike to the chest. This was no longer just about emotional abuse or family favoritism. This was a severe, premeditated federal crime committed against me by my own mother. She had sold my identity to fund her golden child's luxury lifestyle. But the horror did not stop at the theft itself. As I stared at the $600,000 liability attached to my name, the ultimate, terrifying reality of their Paris trip finally snapped into focus. The pieces of data synchronized in my mind, forming a picture so depraved it defied human logic. Terrence knew the FBI and the IRS were closing in on him. He knew his bank accounts were about to be seized and his assets frozen by federal agents. When that happened, this $600,000 commercial loan would instantly default. The private equity firm would immediately exercise their legal right to collect the debt. And since Terrence's accounts would be federally seized, the lender would come directly after the only other person on the contract, the guarantor, me. This was their master plan. The 6 massive suitcases, the midnight break-in, the flight to France. They were completely abandoning the United States forever. They intended to dump their 4 traumatized children in my empty house, forcing me into immediate, non-negotiable motherhood. And while I was drowning in the sheer panic of raising Amanda's kids, the $600,000 loan would default entirely, destroying my finances, my credit, and my ability to ever live a free life again. They were not just running away. They were building a prison for me, ensuring I would be trapped in financial servitude and domestic slavery for the rest of my natural life, paying for the very crimes they committed while they lived comfortably in Europe on stolen millions. I closed the PDF document. I did not cry. I did not scream. The anger I felt transcended any visible emotional reaction. It was a cold, absolute, and highly tactical fury. My mother had tried to bury me alive. She had viewed my hard-earned success as nothing more than raw material to be harvested and burned for their warmth. I picked up my phone and dialed Mitchell's direct line. The time for defensive maneuvers was officially over. I was going to sever every single tentacle they had attached to my life, and I was going to ensure the justice system crushed them into absolute dust. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the rhythmic ringing of the international connection, while I slowly walked back out onto the wooden deck of my villa. The Maldivian sun was just beginning its final descent, casting a brilliant, fiery glow across the tranquil waters of the Indian Ocean. It was a breathtaking view, the kind of perfect, untouched beauty that people save their entire lives to witness for just a few days. Yet as I stared at the vibrant orange and crimson sky blending into the horizon, my mind was entirely consumed by the darkest, most depraved dataset I had ever analyzed. Mitchell answered on the second ring, his tone sharp and expectant. I did not greet him. I simply started laying out the complete architectural blueprint of my family's criminal conspiracy as the pieces slammed together in my head with flawless, terrifying logic. They were never coming back, I stated, my voice echoing with an eerie calm over the line. Paris was not a romantic holiday destination. It was a strategic transit hub. France serves as one of the busiest international flight centers in the world. They booked tickets to Paris because it gave them immediate access to countless connecting flights heading straight toward non-extradition jurisdictions. They intended to vanish completely into the global underground with the $8 million they stole from their commercial real estate investors. I paced the length of my private deck, the warm, tropical breeze contrasting sharply with the freezing realization gripping my chest. I continued breaking down the variables for my attorney. Think about the logistics, Mitchell, I said, my analytical training taking over. They packed 6 massive, hard-shell relocation trunks for 4 young children. Those suitcases were not filled with vacation clothes. I guarantee if the Seattle police force opened those trunks right now, they would find birth certificates, pediatric medical records, immunization history, and preschool enrollment transcripts. Barbara and Amanda actively packed up the entire legal and physical existence of those 4 children. They dumped them inside my unheated house in the middle of a blizzard because they intended for me to become their permanent, non-negotiable guardian. Mitchell let out a harsh breath through the phone. They weaponized your stability against you. They knew you were the only responsible adult in the family who could actually raise them. Exactly, I replied, my grip tightening on the phone. But the children were only the first half of the trap. The financial component is the true masterpiece of their sociopathy. They knew the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation were days away from unsealing the wire fraud indictment. They knew Terrence's domestic bank accounts and assets were about to be federally seized. The moment the government froze his portfolio, that $600,000 fraudulent commercial loan tied to my stolen Social Security number would instantly trigger a default. I stopped pacing and stared out at the dark water lapping against the wooden stilts. The absolute malice of their strategy was breathtaking. They had meticulously engineered a scenario where I would be instantly buried alive under a mountain of sudden, insurmountable responsibilities. If their plan had succeeded, I explained to Mitchell, my voice turning to pure ice, I would have returned from my trip to find 4 traumatized, abandoned toddlers sitting in my living room. While I was drowning in the sheer panic of enrolling them in school, finding emergency childcare, and feeding 4 extra mouths, the private equity firm would drop the hammer. The lender would see my pristine 820 credit score and my lucrative six-figure corporate salary as their only means of recovering the defaulted funds. They would have filed a massive civil suit against me before I even realized my identity had been stolen. My mother had calculated every single angle. She knew I would never let my nieces and nephews end up in the chaotic foster care system. She knew my basic human decency would force me to step up and absorb the maternal burden her golden child had eagerly discarded. And she knew my high-paying data analytics career could technically sustain the financial blow of the fraudulent loan, even if it meant my wages would be brutally garnished for the next 2 decades. They built a permanent prison for me. I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Amanda and Terrence planned to sip champagne in some sunny, untouchable foreign country, living comfortably off millions in stolen investor capital. Barbara planned to live out her retirement, bragging to strangers about her wealthy son-in-law, completely free from the burden of her grandchildren. Meanwhile, the spinster daughter they so openly despised would be trapped in Seattle, forced into immediate domestic servitude and financial slavery, paying off the very debt that funded their escape. The silence on the line was heavy. When Mitchell finally spoke, his usually ruthless tone held a rare note of genuine shock. I have litigated against some of the most corrupt corporate executives on the planet, Clara. But the level of intimate, calculated cruelty your mother and sister orchestrated is on an entirely different spectrum. They literally priced out your entire existence and sold you to save themselves. They sold me for parts, I agreed, staring at the final slivers of sunlight disappearing below the ocean horizon. They viewed my success, my savings, and my clean legal record as nothing more than raw materials to be harvested for their survival. But they made one catastrophic miscalculation in their dataset. What was that? Mitchell asked. They assumed I would react with emotion, I replied. They assumed I would panic cry and immediately default to my programmed role as the obedient family martyr. They completely failed to account for the fact that I am a data director. I do not react to fires by jumping into the flames to save the arsonists. I analyze the burn patterns, and then I lock the doors from the outside. I turned away from the ocean and walked back into the cool, dark interior of my villa. The sunset was over, and the night had officially begun. The shock and the horror of their master plan had fully processed through my system, leaving behind nothing but a lethal, highly focused determination. I was no longer dealing with a family. I was dealing with a hostile criminal syndicate that had attempted a hostile takeover of my entire life. We are not just defending against this, Mitchell, I instructed, my voice sharp and commanding in the quiet room. I want to go on the absolute offensive. I want every single legal weapon your firm possesses aimed directly at their throats. Tell me what you want done, Mitchell said, the sharp sound of his keyboard returning. I outlined the first phase of my retaliation with complete, unhesitating clarity. We begin by suffocating their resources. I want you to contact the federal prosecutor's office immediately. Hand over the high-definition security footage of the child abandonment, the forged loan documents, and the proof of my mother's identity theft. Make sure the Federal Bureau of Investigation knows exactly who helped Terrence attempt to flee international borders. I want every bank account tied to Barbara's Amanda and Terrence completely frozen before the sun rises in Seattle. I paused, making sure my next words carried the full, devastating weight of my intentions. Cut off their access to any bail money. I want them to sit in those concrete cells and realize that the family ATM has officially been permanently decommissioned. The line went quiet for a moment as Mitchell processed the absolute finality in my voice. He was used to clients wavering, caught between the instinct for self-preservation and the lingering guilt of family loyalty. But there was no hesitation left in me. The emotional devastation of realizing my own mother had literally sold me into financial ruin to save her golden child had burned away any remaining shred of daughterly affection. I was no longer a family member. I was a corporate entity, neutralizing a catastrophic threat. I authorize you to hand over the fraudulent loan documents to the federal agents immediately. I continued, my voice steady and precise. Report the identity theft directly to the lead investigator handling Terrence's wire fraud case. Make sure they understand that Barbara used my Social Security number to co-sign that $600,000 commercial loan across state lines. That elevates her crime to a federal offense. Mitchell typed furiously, the sound echoing through the secure connection. I am drafting the emergency disclosure right now. The moment the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service see this, they will classify your mother and sister as active co-conspirators and flight risks. They were already arresting them for child abandonment and breaking and entering at the state level, but this hands the federal prosecutors the exact leverage they need to lock them away for good. I want a total financial blackout, I instructed, pacing the length of my luxurious villa living room. Terrence has been funneling stolen investor capital into accounts shared with Amanda. My mother has been moving money around to cover their tracks and pay for their luxury car leases. Since those funds are directly tied to a federal wire fraud investigation and an active identity theft case, the government has the authority to freeze everything. Yes, they do, Mitchell confirmed with a tone of dark satisfaction. Under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the federal agents can initiate an immediate asset freeze. Every single checking account, savings account, and investment portfolio tied to Barbara, Amanda, and Terrence will be locked down by dawn. Their credit cards will be declined, their banking apps will show zero available balances. And that means they cannot post bail, I concluded, the mathematical certainty of the equation bringing a cold smile to my face. Exactly, Mitchell said. When they stand before the judge for their arraignment on the child abandonment and breaking and entering charges, the magistrate will look at their frozen assets and their intercepted plane tickets to Paris. They are the textbook definition of an extreme flight risk. Without access to their stolen millions, they cannot hire high-priced defense attorneys. They will be entirely dependent on overworked public defenders, and they will be remanded to the county jail without bail until their federal hearings. They are not going anywhere. Good, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark glass of the sliding doors. Let them sit in the cold. Let them experience exactly what they intended for those 4 innocent children. Speaking of the children, Mitchell interjected, his tone shifting slightly to a more cautious register. The Seattle Police Department secured the property. Child Protective Services took emergency custody of Leo, Mia, Noah, and Lily. They are currently safe, warm, and undergoing standard medical evaluations at a specialized receiving center. The social worker on duty is likely going to contact you soon to ask if you are willing to take emergency placement. I closed my eyes, visualizing the terrified faces of my nieces and nephews from the security footage. My heart ached for them. They were entirely innocent victims in a war they did not understand. But my analytical brain knew that rushing back to claim them right now would be a massive strategic error. If I immediately stepped in to rescue the children, Amanda and Barbara would use that in court. They would argue to the judge that they knew I was a reliable guardian, that leaving the kids at my house was just a poorly executed family arrangement, not malicious child abandonment. I could not give their defense lawyers a single inch of maneuvering room. When Child Protective Services calls, you will intercept the communication I directed my attorney. You will inform the social worker that I am out of the country on a long-planned, non-refundable trip and cannot return immediately. You will state for the official record that I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this arrangement, and that I did not consent to caring for the children. I need the state of Washington to fully prosecute my sister and my mother for felony abandonment. If I swoop in and save the day, The prosecutors might downgrade the charges to a misdemeanor. Mitchell let out an impressed breath. That is a brutal strategy, Clara. But it is legally flawless. It forces the state to treat them as hostile perpetrators rather than careless parents. The children will remain in the emergency foster system for a few weeks until the preliminary hearings. It is harsh, but it completely destroys any defense your family might try to mount. They sold me for parts, Mitchell. I replied, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. They tried to chain me to a $600,000 fraudulent debt and saddle me with the permanent responsibility of 4 children while they ran off to sip wine in Europe. I am not being brutal. I am just refusing to be their human shield anymore. Make sure the social worker knows I am willing to provide a substantial financial stipend to the temporary foster family to ensure the kids are given premium care, extra toys, and trauma counseling. I will pay for whatever they need. I just refuse to legally absolve their mother of her crime. I will set up an anonymous care fund through the firm tomorrow morning, Mitchell promised. The children will be well taken care of, and your hands will remain completely clean. I am sending the identity theft dossier to the federal agents right now. By the time the sun comes up in Seattle, your family is going to wake up in a concrete cell with $0 to their names and the full weight of the United States government crashing down on their heads. I thanked him and ended the call. The silence of the villa wrapped around me once again. I walked into the lavish marble bathroom and turned on the rainfall shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering tension of the past 24 hours. The emotional devastation of knowing my own mother hated me enough to orchestrate my total destruction was heavy. But the sheer relief of finally cutting the cord was infinitely stronger. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth to a family that only valued me for my credit score and my bank balance. They had called me a failure, a disappointment, a bitter spinster who had no real life. Yet as I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a plush Egyptian cotton robe, I realized they were the ones who had no real life. Their entire existence was a carefully constructed lie, funded by stolen money and sustained by relentless manipulation. I walked over to the sprawling, king-sized bed and climbed under the crisp white sheets. The air conditioning hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the freezing, unheated house my mother had tried to trap me inside. For the first time in 34 years, I did not feel the oppressive weight of familial duty. I was completely untethered. I closed my eyes, letting the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves lull me to sleep. Tomorrow I would wake up in paradise, and my family would wake up in a federal nightmare of their own making. The next 2 weeks in the Maldives were an absolute masterclass in compartmentalization and self-care. While my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law sat shivering in their separate concrete holding cells at the King County Correctional Facility, I swam with sea turtles in crystal clear water. While they ate bland, processed jail food and desperately tried to contact public defenders who had no time for their manufactured outrage, I dined on fresh lobster prepared by a private chef. I did not check my phone for updates. I did not entertain a single second of guilt. For the first time in my entire existence, I completely prioritized my own peace. When the final day of my luxury retreat arrived, I packed my bags with a renewed sense of lethal purpose. I boarded my return flight to the Pacific Northwest not as the dutiful, exhausted family scapegoat, but as a fully recharged, highly calculating data analytics director preparing for a hostile corporate boardroom takeover. During the descent into Seattle, I changed out of my comfortable travel clothes and stepped into the airplane lavatory to prepare my armor. I slipped on a sharply tailored charcoal gray designer power suit. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black stiletto heels. My skin carried a warm tropical tan, and my posture was completely devoid of the heavy, anxious burden I used to carry around my relatives. I looked exactly like the wealthy, successful executive they had constantly tried to diminish. My driver picked me up directly from the airport terminal and navigated through the familiar Seattle traffic heading straight for the King County Courthouse. Today was the preliminary custody and bail hearing for Amanda Terrence and Barbara. It was the first time they would face a judge since their humiliating airport arrest on Christmas Eve. As my town car pulled up to the massive stone steps of the courthouse, the sheer scale of my family's downfall was immediately apparent. Mitchell was waiting for me near the entrance, holding a sleek leather briefcase, but he was completely flanked by a swarm of local news vans and aggressive journalists. The story of a prominent commercial real estate director caught trying to flee the country after abandoning 4 small children in a freezing house had proven too explosive for the media to ignore. The unsealed federal wire fraud indictment had elevated the scandal from a tragic local incident to a massive, sensationalized financial spectacle. Camera flashes strobed wildly in the gloomy Seattle morning light. "Are you Clara Davis?" a reporter shouted aggressively, shoving a microphone toward my face as I stepped out of the vehicle. "Is it true your mother stole your identity to fund a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme?" Another journalist cut in loudly. "Are you here to take custody of your abandoned nieces and nephews today?" I did not break my stride. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, staring straight ahead through my designer sunglasses. Mitchell seamlessly stepped between me and the flashing cameras, raising a hand to block their path. "My client has no comment at this time," Mitchell stated with commanding authority, easily guiding me through the chaotic press gaggle and toward the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. "We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and the Department of Children, Youth, and Families." We cleared the security checkpoint and left the shouting reporters behind. The quiet, sterile hallways of the legal building felt like a battleground. Mitchell leaned in close as we walked toward the assigned mediation room. "They are desperate, Clara," he warned me, his voice dropping to a low, tactical murmur. "The federal prosecutors successfully froze every single financial asset they have. They are relying entirely on court-appointed public defenders. The judge is going to determine bail and emergency custody of the children right after this mandatory mediation session. Your father is inside, waiting for you. They are going to beg." I did not break my stride. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my stiletto heels echoed down the long corridor, sounding like a ticking countdown. "Let them beg," I replied smoothly. "I came here to watch the hammer fall." Mitchell pushed open the heavy oak door to the mediation room. The stark fluorescent lighting illuminated a scene that completely validated my entire Maldivian vacation. Sitting on one side of a long metal table were Terrence, Amanda, and Barbara. The 3 of them were dressed in identical, oversized Orange County jail jumpsuits, their wrists securely fastened to the table with heavy steel chains. Sitting opposite them was my father, Richard, wearing a severely rumpled suit and sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. The moment I stepped into the room in my tailored power suit, Richard jerked his head up. His eyes were bloodshot and desperate. He scrambled out of his chair and rushed toward me, but Mitchell immediately stepped forward, raising a firm hand to halt his advance. "Clara, thank God you are here," Richard wept, his voice cracking with panic. "You have to fix this nightmare. You make so much money at your corporate job. Please, just pay the $600,000 loan so the bank drops the civil suit. Tell the federal agents you gave your mother permission to use your social security number. Drop the identity theft charges right now. Terrence just made a simple financial mistake. We are your family. We have to stick together." I stared at my father, utterly repulsed by his lifetime commitment to enabling their abuse. Before I could respond, Amanda launched into her own theatrical performance. "I was severely depressed, Clara." Amanda wailed, her unwashed hair falling in her face as she violently rattled her chains. The stress of raising 4 kids and managing Terrence's real estate business completely broke my mental health. I was not thinking straight when we left them at your house. I am a victim of severe burnout. You cannot let the state take my babies away. You have to take custody of them right now and keep them until we get this sorted out." I did not even blink at her manufactured tears. She was trying to weaponize mental health to excuse felony child abandonment. "Stop sobbing, Amanda Barbara," suddenly snapped, her sharp, commanding tone completely unaffected by her orange prison uniform. My mother glared at me across the metal table, her eyes burning with the exact same narcissistic entitlement she had wielded my entire life. Clara pulled out a chair and listened to me closely. "You are going to instruct your lawyer to withdraw those federal statements immediately. You will take those children back to your house today, and you will assume full legal responsibility for that commercial loan. It is your absolute duty as a daughter to step up and clean this family mess. I gave you life, and now you owe us your full cooperation." I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer absurdity of her commands echo off the barren walls. They were facing federal prison, yet they still demanded my total servitude. I slowly unbuttoned my suit jacket, pulled out the metal chair directly across from my mother, and finally sat down at the table. The heavy wooden door of the mediation room swung open before I even had to formulate a response to my mother's delusional demands. A stern court bailiff stepped inside, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "Time is up. The Honorable Judge Hernandez is ready for you in courtroom 4, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. I did not say a single word to Barbara, Amanda, or Terrence. I simply turned my back on them and walked out, the clicking of my heels setting the rhythm for their impending execution. Courtroom 4 was an imposing space, lined with dark mahogany and the seal of the state of Washington mounted high on the wall. I took my seat at the petitioner's table with Mitchell, while the bailiffs directed my family to the respondent's side. The clanking of their steel chains was the only sound in the cavernous room until Judge Hernandez entered. She was a no-nonsense magistrate with sharp eyes that immediately swept over the defendants in their orange jumpsuits. Seated in the gallery directly behind Mitchell and me was a man in a plain gray suit, holding a thick briefcase. I knew exactly who he was. Mitchell had arranged for a lead investigator from the Internal Revenue Service to attend the hearing. Judge Hernandez struck her gavel and opened the proceedings. "We are here for the preliminary bail and emergency custody hearing for Amanda and Terrence as well as Barbara. Before we address the severe felony charges of child abandonment and breaking and entering, the court must establish the immediate placement of the 4 minor children currently in state custody." The judge looked directly at me. "Miss Davis, you are the maternal aunt? The defense counsel has submitted a motion stating that you are a highly capable, financially stable relative who can immediately assume custody of these children. Furthermore, your father has filed a request for you to drop the impending civil suits regarding the $600,000 commercial loan to preserve family unity. Are you willing to take emergency custody today and facilitate a private family resolution?" The entire courtroom held its breath. Richard looked at me with pleading, tear-filled eyes. Amanda was nodding frantically, trying to project the image of a desperate, loving mother. Barbara sat with her chin raised, fully expecting me to cave to the societal pressure of the courtroom and accept my designated role as the family savior. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket and met the judge's gaze with absolute, unwavering certainty. "Your Honor, I absolutely refuse to accept custody of those children, and I will not drop a single civil or criminal suit against the defendants," I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clear precision. "In fact, I am here today to officially escalate the charges against them." A loud gasp escaped my father's lips. Amanda's frantic nodding violently stopped. "Your Honor, the defense is attempting to frame this as a simple lapse in parental judgment," Mitchell interjected, stepping up beside me and placing a massive stack of heavily tabbed documents onto the judge's bench. "My client is not dealing with a family misunderstanding. She is the targeted victim of a highly sophisticated, premeditated federal criminal conspiracy." Mitchell turned to the court clerk. "We have submitted Exhibit A into evidence. It is a verified audio recording of a phone call made by Barbara to my client on Christmas Eve, exactly 40 minutes after the children were locked inside an unheated house." Judge Hernandez nodded, granting permission to play the audio. Mitchell connected his tablet to the courtroom speaker system. The room fell dead silent as my mother's shrill, arrogant voice blasted through the overhead speakers. "I told you I was leaving them. Figure it out, spinster. Our flight board's in 20 minutes. The raw malice in Barbara's recorded voice completely destroyed any illusion of a caring grandmother. The judge visibly recoiled, her lips tightening into a furious line. I watched Barbara's face drain of all color. She physically shrank into her chair, the horrifying realization dawning on her that her own arrogant words had just sealed her fate. That recording established his deliberate, malicious intent to abandon minors in a hazardous environment, to facilitate international flight, Mitchell stated coldly. But the child abandonment was merely a tactical maneuver to execute a massive financial fraud. Mitchell handed the next stack of documents directly to the judge. Exhibit B is a comprehensive forensic audit of Terrence's commercial real estate business. As the court will see, there is no real estate. The defendant has been operating a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. We have provided bank statements proving that Amanda was not suffering from maternal burnout. She is listed as the chief financial officer on 3 fraudulent shell companies and actively wired millions in stolen investor capital to offshore accounts. Terrence lunged forward in his seat, his chains rattling loudly against the heavy wooden table. "That is a lie. Those are legitimate business transactions. Sit down and remain silent." Judge Hernandez barked, slamming down with explosive force. "Or I will hold you in contempt and have you gagged." Terrence collapsed back into his chair, sheer terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. Amanda began sobbing uncontrollably, but this time, it was not a manipulation tactic. It was the absolute panic of a criminal who realized she was going to federal prison. I stepped forward, taking total control of the narrative. I looked directly at Barbara. "The final piece of evidence is Exhibit C," I told the judge, my voice turning to pure ice. 2 years ago, my mother deliberately stole my birth certificate and my social security number. She used my stolen identity to forge a digital signature and co-sign a fraudulent $600,000 commercial bridging loan to keep Terrence's Ponzi scheme from collapsing. I turned toward the gallery and made direct eye contact with the man in the gray suit. "I am officially pressing federal charges for severe identity theft and bank fraud against Barbara and Amanda," I declared, my voice echoing with lethal authority. "I am handing all forensic evidence over to the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. I want every single one of them prosecuted to the absolute maximum extent of federal law." The guillotine had officially dropped. There was no more family. There was only the brutal, inescapable weight of the justice system crashing down on their heads. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and frantic whispers the second the words left my mouth. The man in the gray suit, the lead investigator for the Internal Revenue Service, stood up from the gallery bench. He walked directly to the wooden partition, his face a mask of absolute federal authority, and formally accepted the thick folders of forensic evidence Mitchell handed him. Amanda let out a gut-wrenching shriek, finally comprehending that her days of designer handbags and luxury spa retreats had just evaporated into a lengthy federal prison sentence. Terrence slammed his fists against the table, his heavy chains rattling violently as he cursed at his public defender. Barbara sat, completely paralyzed. The arrogant matriarch who had dictated my entire existence was now physically shrinking under the unforgiving fluorescent lights of the courtroom. But it was my father, Richard, who made one final, desperate attempt to weaponize my empathy. He stood up from his chair in the gallery, his face red and streaked with tears. "Clara, "Stop this right now," he begged, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "You are destroying us. We are your blood. We are your family. You cannot just throw your own mother and sister to the federal government. Have some compassion." I turned slowly to face my father. For 34 years, I had craved his protection. I had waited for him to stand up to Barbara, to defend me against Amanda's relentless mockery, to acknowledge my actual worth. Instead, he had allowed them to bleed me dry while he stood safely on the sidelines, enabling their cruelty to keep his own peace. My compassion was entirely depleted. Compassion. I echoed the word, tasting like rust on my tongue. You want compassion for the people who actively planned to destroy my entire future? I looked directly into my father's weeping eyes, refusing to break contact. Do not dare use the word family to manipulate me into saving criminals. I shifted my gaze to Barbara, Amanda, and Terrence. The three of them stared back at me, stripped of their power and their stolen wealth. "Family doesn't steal your identity to fund a Ponzi scheme," I stated, my voice echoing off the high mahogany walls with razor-sharp clarity. "Family doesn't dump 4 terrified toddlers in the freezing snow to flee the country. You called me a failure because I didn't serve your narrative. You are parasites, and I am cutting the host off." Judge Hernandez banged her gavel, the sharp crack snapping the courtroom back to total silence. Richard collapsed into his seat, burying his face in his hands. He finally understood that the daughter he had treated as a disposable asset had just become the architect of their absolute ruin. "Order in this court," Judge Hernandez commanded, her eyes narrowing as she glared down at the defense table. She shuffled the massive stack of forensic documents Mitchell had provided, shaking her head in sheer disgust. "The court has reviewed the evidence presented," the judge announced, her tone radiating zero tolerance. "The defendants are currently facing extreme state-level felony charges for severe child abandonment and breaking and entering. Furthermore, the court acknowledges the imminent federal indictments for wire fraud, bank fraud, and felony identity theft brought forward by the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Amanda began hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she tugged desperately at her restraints. "Please, Your Honor," she wailed. "I need to see my babies. I am a good mother. You have to let me go home." Judge Hernandez leaned forward over the bench, her expression as hard as granite. "You forfeited your right to call yourself a good mother the second you locked those children in a freezing house and attempted to board a flight to Paris. The sheer premeditated cruelty of your actions is staggering." The judge turned her attention to the public defenders, who were frantically whispering among themselves, entirely overwhelmed by the avalanche of federal evidence that had just been dumped into their laps. Given the massive scale of the financial crimes and the undeniable documented attempt to cross international borders to evade justice, this court classifies Terrence, Amanda, and Barbara as extreme flight risks, Judge Hernandez declared. The defendants have proven they possess the means, the motive, and the absolute willingness to flee the jurisdiction of the United States. Furthermore, all known financial assets tied to the defendants have been officially frozen by federal mandate, rendering them incapable of posting any legitimate bond. Barbara let out a choked gasp, finally finding her voice. "You cannot keep us here. We have rights. We demand bail." "Bail is completely denied," Judge Hernandez fired back, striking her gavel with finality. "The defendants are remanded to the immediate custody of the King County Correctional Facility pending their federal arraignments. This hearing is concluded." The sound of that gavel strike was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of my chains breaking. It was the sound of 10 years of emotional abuse, financial extortion, and relentless gaslighting being completely crushed under the immense weight of the justice system. 4 armed bailiffs immediately moved in on the defense table. They grabbed Terrence by his upper arms, hauling him aggressively to his feet. He did not fight them. His arrogant swagger was entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, vacant stare of a man who knew he was going to spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary. Amanda screamed wildly, dragging her feet as 2 female deputies forced her toward the holding cell doors. She shouted my name, begging me to withdraw the evidence, pleading for a mercy she had never once shown me. I did not even blink. Then the bailiffs pulled Barbara from her chair. My mother looked at me one last time before they dragged her away. There was no apology in her eyes. There was only the furious, bewildered shock of a narcissist who had finally encountered an unmovable boundary. I stood tall in my tailored power suit, watching the heavy metal doors slam shut behind them. The courtroom slowly began to clear out. The man in the gray suit gave me a curt, respectful nod before exiting to prepare the federal warrants. Richard remained slumped in the gallery, weeping, alone, completely shattered by the destruction of his perfect family facade. I picked up my designer briefcase and walked out of the courtroom. The air in the hallway felt incredibly light, as if a toxic fog had finally lifted. I had survived their betrayal, and I had permanently neutralized their threat. 6 months evaporated in a whirlwind of federal indictments, aggressive asset seizures, and spectacular courtroom collapses. I returned to my normal routine as a data analytics director, securing a major promotion that required my full professional attention, while my attorney Mitchell managed the ongoing legal fallout from his downtown Seattle office. He provided me with weekly, highly sanitized updates. I requested factual data points, not emotional narratives, and Mitchell delivered exactly that. Terrence was the first to completely break under the crushing weight of the federal government. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had compiled an airtight case against him. Facing decades behind bars, his court-appointed public defender strongly advised him to take a plea deal. Terrence formally pled guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and massive tax evasion. During his sentencing hearing, he attempted to use his old corporate charm to sway the federal judge, citing a brief lapse in judgment and promising to eventually pay the victims back. The judge was entirely unamused by his performance. Terrence was sentenced to 18 years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no possibility of early parole. The fake real estate mogul was officially traded for an inmate number. Amanda fared no better. My sister spent months in the county jail, desperately trying to manipulate the legal system. She fired 3 different public defenders, constantly claiming they were incompetent and biased against her. When her trial finally commenced, she leaned heavily into her favorite strategy. She played the ultimate victim. She took the stand and sobbed, claiming Terrence forced her to sign those fraudulent corporate documents, and that her severe depression caused her to temporarily leave the children at my house. The prosecution absolutely decimated her defense. They played the security footage of her laughing and sipping mimosas at the airport terminal, just 1 hour after abandoning her kids in a freezing blizzard. They projected massive spreadsheets onto the courtroom screens, tracing millions of dollars in stolen investor capital directly to her private offshore accounts and her lavish designer shopping sprees. The jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Amanda was found guilty of felony child abandonment, accessory to federal wire fraud, and money laundering. She was handed a brutal 9-year sentence in a federal women's correctional facility. The golden child was officially stripped of her crown. But the most satisfying consequence was the absolute financial decimation of their fabricated lifestyle. Because their entire existence was funded by a criminal enterprise, the federal government initiated immediate asset forfeiture under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. United States Marshals arrived at their sprawling suburban mansion and placed a massive federal seizure notice right on the front door. The property was seized, appraised, and rapidly auctioned off to compensate the defrauded commercial real estate investors. Every single status symbol Amanda and Terrence had used to assert their superiority over me was ruthlessly liquidated. Federal agents impounded the luxury imported SUV Terrence loved to show off at family gatherings. They confiscated Amanda's massive collection of designer handbags, her expensive jewelry, and even the custom-tailored Italian suits Terrence wore to his fraudulent business meetings. The government literally emptied their closets. The lavish lifestyle they had continuously rubbed in my face was boxed up, cataloged as criminal evidence, and sold to the highest bidder at a government auction. I actually attended the federal government auction online. I logged into the portal from my office computer during my lunch break, purely out of analytical curiosity. I watched a digital bidding war erupt over Amanda's prized diamond necklace, the exact same necklace she had flaunted at Thanksgiving while mocking my single status. It sold to an anonymous bidder for a fraction of its original price. The money went straight into a restitution fund for the victims Terrence had scammed. I watched the luxury SUV get auctioned off to a used car dealership. Watching their entire fake reality get liquidated piece by piece, dollar by dollar, was the ultimate closure. It proved that everything my parents had praised them for was nothing but a mirage. While Amanda and Terrence were being processed into the federal prison system, I had my own legal victory to secure. The $600,000 commercial bridging loan that Barbara had fraudulently co-signed using my stolen Social Security number was still looming in the background. However, the private equity firm quickly realized they had walked into a federal crime scene. Armed with the official FBI reports, the airport security footage, and the undeniable proof of identity theft, Mitchell went on the offensive against their corporate lawyers. He did not just demand they clear my name. He threatened to drag the lending firm into a massive countersuit for failing to perform basic due diligence and essentially funding a domestic terrorist operation against my finances. The private equity firm immediately backed down. They formally voided my signature on the contract, completely scrubbing the fraudulent debt from my credit report. My pristine 820 credit score was entirely restored. My financial fortress remained completely impenetrable. I printed the final release documents and shredded the initial fraudulent contract, watching the paper turn into tiny, meaningless ribbons. The trap my mother had meticulously designed to force me into permanent domestic servitude had been completely dismantled. Mitchell sent me the final inventory report of the seized assets later that afternoon. I sat in my office reading the spreadsheets with a profound sense of satisfaction. The math had finally balanced perfectly. Every dollar they stole had been stripped away. They were left with absolutely nothing but the orange jumpsuits on their backs. The media coverage surrounding the case slowly faded. The local news stations moved on to other scandals, and the sensational headlines about the airport arrest were replaced by news stories. But the silence that settled over my life was not empty. It was the rich, peaceful silence of a completely secure environment. I no longer dreaded incoming phone calls. I no longer braced myself for sudden demands for money or manipulative guilt trips about family loyalty. The toxic noise that had defined my entire 34 years of existence had been permanently muted. The scapegoat daughter, the spinster failure, was the only one left standing completely untouchable and entirely free. Barbara had always believed she was the untouchable matriarch, the puppet master who could bend the world to fit her perfect suburban narrative. She walked into the federal courthouse for her identity theft trial, wearing a conservative navy dress, attempting to project the image of a bewildered, well-meaning mother who simply got caught in the crossfire of her son-in-law's mistakes. Her high-priced defense attorney tried to argue that she did not fully understand the legal implications of handling my Social Security number. She actually had the audacity to take the stand and weep, claiming she only signed the documents because she thought she was protecting her grandchildren from a temporary financial hardship. The federal prosecutor did not waste a single second indulging her theatrical performance. He treated her tears with absolute clinical disdain. He projected the timeline of her actions onto the massive courtroom monitors. He highlighted the exact date she stole my vital records from the family safe. He pulled up the digital metadata showing her IP address accessing the fraudulent bridging loan application. Then he delivered the final, fatal blow. He played the airport audio recording for the entire gallery to hear. When the jury heard her shrill, arrogant voice, bragging about abandoning 4 freezing children and demanding I figure it out, any trace of sympathy in the room evaporated instantly. The jury saw her exactly as I had seen her my entire life. She was a ruthless, calculating narcissist who viewed human beings as disposable stepping stones for her own advancement. The verdict was unanimous. Barbara was convicted of felony identity theft and accessory to federal wire fraud. The judge showed a microscopic sliver of leniency due to her age, sentencing her to 4 years in a federal minimum security prison. The woman who had spent decades dictating my worth and obsessing over her country club status was stripped of her designer jewelry, fingerprinted, and issued an inmate number. Her precious social standing was completely obliterated. With Barbara incarcerated, the entire foundation of my parents' manufactured reality collapsed directly onto Richard. My father had spent 34 years perfecting the art of passive enabling. He had always chosen the path of least resistance, quietly tolerating Barbara's abuse and Amanda's entitlement just to keep the peace. He had sat by and watched them try to chain me to a $600,000 fraudulent debt, yet he still had the nerve to beg me for compassion in that mediation room. Now he was forced to pay the ultimate price for his lifetime of cowardice. The legal fees to defend Barbara against the United States government were absolutely astronomical. Federal defense attorneys require massive upfront retainers, and Richard burned through his entire liquid savings within the first 2 months of the trial. Without Terrence's stolen money flowing into their accounts, and with Barbara's name heavily tied to the massive civil restitution orders from the defrauded investors, Richard was pushed to the absolute brink of total financial ruin. I monitored his collapse through public property records and the meticulous data updates Mitchell provided. To avoid a complete, devastating bankruptcy and to satisfy the remaining legal debts Richard was forced to liquidate, the one thing Barbara valued above all else: the pristine, sprawling suburban house. The property was quickly listed for a rushed below-market sale. The massive dining room where they had constantly mocked my single status, the lavish living room where they had paraded Amanda's fake success, and the front porch where they had mercilessly dumped 4 innocent children were all sold off to strangers at a steep discount. Richard was forced to pack up the remnants of their shattered life entirely alone. Without his wife to bark orders, and without his golden child to dote upon, he became a hollow ghost of a man. He moved into a tiny, run-down, 1-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. The building had peeling paint, faulty plumbing, and a view of a noisy, congested highway. It was the exact type of dwelling my parents used to actively mock whenever we drove past lower-income neighborhoods. But the absolute worst punishment for Richard was not the cramped, dilapidated apartment or the sudden crushing poverty. It was the total, permanent social exile. My parents had spent decades cultivating a superficial network of wealthy, elite friends at their exclusive country club. They had hosted lavish dinner parties and attended high society galas, always projecting the image of flawless prosperity. When the federal indictments hit the local news and the scandalous details of the airport arrest became public knowledge, that entire social network violently severed ties. Richard's former friends stopped returning his phone calls. His country club membership was quietly revoked under the guise of a moral conduct clause. When he tried to show up at his usual upscale restaurants or local social events, he was met with cold stares and turned backs. Nobody wanted to be associated with the enabler of a massive federal fraud scheme and a convicted child abandoner. He was completely blacklisted, ostracized by the very society he had allowed his wife to destroy my mental health to impress. I watched this entire karmic reckoning unfold from the pristine, unbothered sanctuary of my own life. I did not send him a dime. I did not offer to help him move into his depressing new apartment. I did not answer the two desperate, rambling voicemails he left on my assistant's office line, begging for a chance to explain his side of the story. I maintained my absolute, ironclad boundary. He had made his bed with absolute complicity, and now he was forced to sleep in it, completely alone. With my parents utterly neutralized and my sister locked away, the only unresolved variable remaining in this massive federal fallout was the fate of the 4 innocent children. Leo, Mia, Noah, and Lily had been living in a highly rated temporary foster home, funded entirely by the anonymous stipend I had established through Mitchell's firm. They were safe, warm, and receiving top-tier trauma counseling, but they needed a permanent, stable guardian. The state of Washington scheduled the final family court custody hearing to determine their long-term placement. I attended the hearing with Mitchell, not as a prospective guardian, but as an interested observer, wanting to ensure the system did not fail my nieces and nephews. I walked into the courtroom expecting to see a lineup of distant, opportunistic relatives trying to claim the children for state welfare benefits. Instead, I saw a single, striking figure sitting quietly in the front row of the gallery. It was Gloria Terrence's mother. I had only met Gloria a handful of times at highly orchestrated family events. My mother, Barbara, had always chased the illusion of wealth stepping on my neck to reach the country club. Therefore, she had always treated Gloria with thinly veiled condescension, because Gloria was a hard-working, working-class African-American woman who ran a modest catering business. Barbara considered her socially inferior. Terrence had largely distanced himself from his mother once he began constructing his fraudulent, wealthy persona, treating her genuine blue-collar roots as an embarrassment to his fake real estate empire. Gloria stood up when she saw me enter. She did not look away or try to avoid eye contact. She walked directly toward me, her posture radiating an incredible, dignified strength, despite the obvious exhaustion lining her face. She wore a simple, impeccably pressed dress, her hands clutching a thick folder of financial documents and character references she had compiled for the judge. She stopped a few feet away from me. There was no manipulation in her eyes. There was only profound, devastating sorrow. Clara, Gloria said, her voice trembling but resolute. I am so deeply, incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea what Terrence was doing. I did not know about the stolen money, and I swear to you on my life, I did not know they abandoned those precious babies on your porch. When the federal agents contacted me about his arrest, my heart completely broke. He is my son, but what he did to those people and what he tried to do to you is pure evil. I am so ashamed. Tears spilled over her cheeks, but she did not wipe them away. She stood there completely owning the sins of a son she had raised to be better. It was the most profound display of accountability I had ever witnessed. In all my 34 years of existence, no one in my own bloodline had ever offered me a genuine apology. Yet here was this remarkable woman, carrying the crushing weight of her son's federal crimes, stepping forward to validate my trauma without a single excuse. Gloria wore her modest status like a badge of honor, proving that true wealth lies in unwavering integrity and a pure heart. You have nothing to apologize for, Gloria, I replied, my voice softening with absolute, genuine respect. Terrence made his own calculated choices. You are not responsible for his crimes. I am here to claim the children, she stated firmly, straightening her shoulders to their full height. I may not have the millions of dollars my son pretended to have, and I know my house is small, but I will work myself to the bone to make sure those kids are raised with actual morals, real love, and absolute honesty. I will not let them grow up to be like him. The court proceedings began shortly after our conversation. The state social worker presented Gloria's petition for full legal and physical custody. The judge meticulously reviewed her background check, her steady employment history, and the glowing character references she had provided. There was absolutely no contest. The magistrate slammed the gavel down, officially granting Gloria permanent full custody of Leo, Mia, Noah, and Lily. The profound relief that washed over Gloria's face was incredibly beautiful to witness. However, my analytical brain was already processing the logistical data. Raising 4 young children is a monumental, wildly expensive undertaking. Gloria was a spectacular, loving woman, but shoving 4 traumatized kids into a cramped working-class apartment would create immense, unnecessary financial pressure. Amanda and Terrence had stolen millions, and I refused to let their innocent children suffer in poverty while their grandmother worked herself into an early grave to support them. I did not intervene in the courtroom. I waited until the hearing was completely adjourned and the legal paperwork was filed. Then I turned to my attorney. Mitchell, I instructed, keeping my voice low and strictly professional. I want you to draft the paperwork for a comprehensive, bulletproof educational trust. I am fully funding it today. Allocate enough capital to guarantee full, unhindered tuition for Leo, Mia, Noah, and Lily from grade school all the way through a master's degree at any university they choose. Secure it so completely that neither Amanda nor Terrence can ever access a single penny, even if they are released from prison in the next century. Consider the trust fully structured by this afternoon. Mitchell nodded already, pulling out his tablet to begin the legal drafting process. I am not finished, I continued, my gaze fixed on Gloria as she tearfully hugged the state social worker across the room. Find a premium, spacious 5-bedroom house in a highly rated, extremely safe Seattle suburb. I want a large backyard, an updated kitchen, and excellent security. Purchase the property outright in cash through an anonymous limited liability company. Once the deed is completely cleared, transfer the property directly into a living trust exclusively for Gloria. I want the property taxes and the housing insurance prepaid for the next 20 years. Mitchell paused, looking at me with a rare expression of genuine surprise. That is a massive capital expenditure, Clara. You owe them absolutely nothing. I am not doing this out of obligation to my sister or my brother-in-law, I stated with absolute, unshakable clarity. I am doing this to break the generational curse. I am doing this because Gloria proved that true family has absolutely nothing to do with shared DNA or matched bloodlines. True family is defined entirely by character accountability and the relentless willingness to show up when things get dark. Gloria is stepping into the fire to save those kids. I am simply providing the fireproof suit. Within a month, the entire operation was flawlessly executed. Mitchell handed Gloria the keys to a stunning, fully paid-off suburban home in one of the best school districts in Washington state. The educational trust was legally locked and heavily guarded by a team of elite financial fiduciaries. When Gloria realized what I had done, she called me, weeping tears of absolute, unfiltered joy and profound gratitude. She tried to refuse the house, claiming it was entirely too much, but I swiftly cut her off. I told her the house was not a gift. It was a strategic investment in 4 children who desperately needed a healthy, stable environment to unlearn the toxic entitlement their parents had modeled. Gloria moved the children into their new, beautiful home. She enrolled them in excellent schools and surrounded them with the kind of fierce, unwavering love my mother was never capable of providing. She sent me regular, joyful updates photos of the kids smiling in their new backyard, report cards showing their rising grades, and videos of them helping her bake in her massive new kitchen. I watched those children flourish under the care of a woman who genuinely valued their souls rather than their status. I had permanently severed the toxic roots of my biological family tree. But in doing so, I had managed to plant an entirely new, beautiful garden for the innocent survivors. The rain lashed rhythmically against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my corner office, high above the bustling streets of downtown Seattle. I sat in my ergonomic leather chair, my eyes scanning a complex array of global data reports glowing across 3 massive monitors. The numbers flowing down the screens were pristine, logical, and absolute. Unlike the people who shared my DNA data, never lied, never manipulated, and never demanded a sacrifice it had not earned. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, allowing the profound, absolute serenity of the quiet room to wash over me. It had been exactly 1 year since the Christmas Eve that permanently altered the trajectory of my existence. 1 year since I sat in a first-class cabin flying to the Maldives while my mother attempted to bury me alive under a mountain of stolen debt and abandoned children. As I reviewed the quarterly analytics for my department, a sudden, striking realization settled into my chest. The trauma of that ultimate betrayal was entirely gone. The deep, agonizing wounds inflicted by decades of emotional abuse had not just healed, they had been completely paved over by the unshakable foundation of my own making. For 34 years, I had been force-fed a narrative carefully crafted by Barbara and Richard. In their eyes, I was the bitter spinster, the designated family disappointment who had failed to secure a wealthy husband and a suburban mansion. I was the acceptable collateral damage, the reliable human ATM expected to fund Amanda's golden lifestyle without a single word of gratitude. They had genuinely believed that my lack of a traditional family structure made me weak, desperate, and infinitely pliable. They could not have been more wrong. My single status was not a failure. It was my ultimate armor. It gave me the unrestricted freedom to build a formidable career, to accumulate massive, heavily guarded wealth, and to walk away from their toxicity without needing to ask a single person for permission. I was a fiercely successful data analytics director, commanding a global team, and I had protected my peace with the exact same ruthless precision I applied to my corporate strategies. I turned away from the monitors and looked out over the Seattle skyline. The frantic, suffocating noise of my former life had been permanently muted. There were no more midnight phone calls demanding emergency cash to cover Terrence's fraudulent car leases. There were no more holiday dinners filled with passive-aggressive insults about my appearance or my career choices. The relentless, exhausting cycle of manufacturing crises and demanding my immediate servitude had been completely eradicated. In its place was a beautiful, drama-free existence. My weekends were my own. My financial portfolio was impenetrable. I spent my free time traveling the world on my own terms, mentoring young women in the tech industry, and occasionally visiting Gloria to watch my nieces and nephews thrive in their new stable reality. I had successfully excised the parasitic infection from my life, and the host was finally truly flourishing. I leaned back and smiled a genuine expression of absolute victory. I was not the family failure. I was the architect of my own salvation, and the view from the top was absolutely spectacular. The truth is, society actively conditions us to believe that blood is an absolutely unbreakable bond. We are taught from a very young age that family is everything, that you must constantly forgive and forget, and that walking away from your relatives is the ultimate shameful failure. But I am here to tell you with absolute certainty that this narrative is an incredibly dangerous lie. Walking away from toxic blood relatives is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of profound self-preservation. When the people who are supposed to protect and nurture you decide to view you as nothing more than a disposable asset, permanently severing that connection is the only logical way to survive. My biological mother and sister actively tried to lock me inside a lifelong financial and emotional prison simply so they could live out a stolen criminal fantasy. They used my hard work, my pristine credit score, and my basic human decency as weapons against my very existence. If I had listened to the intense societal pressure to just keep the peace and accept my designated role as the family scapegoat, I would currently be buried under a massive mountain of fraudulent commercial debt. I would be struggling to raise four traumatized children entirely alone, while my abusers lived comfortably abroad on stolen millions. I would have been completely destroyed. Instead, I chose to be ruthlessly protective in my own defense. I chose cold logic over fabricated guilt. I chose my own uncompromised sanity over their unearned comfort. And by taking a scalpel to the toxic rot in my family tree, I finally made room for something genuinely beautiful to grow in its place. My life is no longer defined by the deeply flawed people who tried to break me. It is defined by the incredible, chosen family I have deliberately surrounded myself with. I have brilliant, relentlessly supportive friends who actively celebrate my corporate success instead of resenting it. I have the profound, quiet joy of watching my nieces and nephews grow up in a healthy, fiercely loving environment under Gloria's protection. Gloria proved to me that a true matriarch does not sacrifice innocent people to save a guilty child. She stands directly in the fire to make sure the right thing is done. That is the exact kind of high-caliber energy I allow into my life now. You do not owe your hard-earned peace to anyone simply because you happen to share a last name. You do not have to set your own future on fire just to keep your abusers warm. Building a boundary made of solid steel is the most loving, empowering thing you can ever do for yourself. My untethered freedom is worth infinitely more than a fake seat at a toxic holiday dinner table. If you have ever had to legally cut off family members who tried to destroy your life for their own gain, share your story in the comments below. Never let anyone use family as a weapon against you. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of surviving the unimaginable, and I will see you in the next one.